You're listening to Uptown Radio. It's December 13th. I'm Abby Rose Notar Nicola.
And I'm Shankar Nasathray. In today's show, pro-Palestinian student groups at Columbia University are threatening to withhold tuition if the school does not divest.
Students feel utterly disempowered in terms of what options they have available to get the administration to listen to their demands.
Meanwhile, Israeli trade officials are in New York today, promoting their tech startups in partnership with Mayor Eric Adams.
We want to make New York the home away from home for Israeli companies.
Also on today's show, New York dog owners are starting to avoid kennels. They're worried about a highly infectious and unnamed virus that's spreading across the nation.
We just kept him out of daycare, kept him out of the dog parks, not going to random dogs on the street. He's my love, so I don't want anything bad to happen to him.
All that and more on Uptown Radio. But first, the news.
From Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Vikram Najawan. The Federal Reserve announced this afternoon that they're holding interest rates steady. This comes after recent economic reports show slowing inflation in the U.S. The Fed forecasts that they'll likely cut interest rates 3 times next year. Fed Chair Jay Powell expressed optimism at a press conference following this event. House Republicans are threatening to hold Hunter Biden in contempt after he defied a congressional subpoena today. The president's son showed up in front of the Capitol and demanded a public hearing rather than a closed-doors deposition. Hunter Biden blamed Republicans for unfairly targeting his father, President Biden, who he insisted had no financial involvement in any of his businesses. This was Hunter Biden's first statement since facing 2 criminal indictments. In a press conference today, the State Department said that a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war would, quote, not be in the long-term security interests of the region. This comes after an overwhelming vote for a ceasefire yesterday at an emergency session of the UN General Assembly. The U.S. was among the mere 13 countries that opposed that motion, even as President Biden has since voiced his concerns over Israel's, quote, indiscriminate bombing of Gaza. The Supreme Court announced that it will hear a case on whether to restrict access to the abortion pill, mifepristone. This would be the court's most significant abortion decision since overturning Roe v. Wade last year. They expect to arrive at a verdict by July of next year, when abortion access will be a key issue leading up to the 2024 election. Tesla has recalled almost 2 million cars to fix a software error related to its autopilot feature. This national recall follows a 2-year investigation from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Investigators found a high risk of crashes while the autopilot feature was engaged on the cars. Now, Tesla plans to install new safeguards on their vehicles. And nearly 200 countries pledged to transition away from fossil fuels at the end of this year's UN Climate Summit in Dubai. It marks a historic first for the 28-year-old global gathering. This is Vikram Najawan, Columbia Radio News.
It is a polarizing time on Columbia University's campus. Students protest every week in regards to the Israel-Palestine conflict. Police monitor the main entrance, and chants can be heard from blocks away. But so far, pro-Palestinian groups are not satisfied with the university's response. That's why they are taking it to the next level, a tuition strike. These organizations will be rallying on campus to make their divestment demands known. I spoke with Dr. Qayyum Ahmed, a human rights scholar and assistant professor at the School of Public Health at Columbia University, and asked him what this strike is all about.
Tuition strike, as I understand it, which is a student-led initiative, really centers on withholding student tuition in order to put pressure on the university to divest from its support of Israeli apartheid.
In this case, my question would be, what would divestment look like?
Divestment would look like the closure of our campus in Israel, the accountability of the board and trustees in terms of their investments in Israeli apartheid, a clear indication that we are going to be divesting our resources and funds from supporting the Israeli regime and their continued human rights violations. I think it's also a commitment beyond simply a financial commitment. It's an ideological statement. It's an ideological commitment.
So why is this strike happening, and why are students doing this?
I think students feel utterly disempowered in terms of what options they have available to get the administration to listen to their demands. And so they have decided to escalate their tactics.
Other universities around the country are also striking for divestment, but so far none have been successful. Why do you think that Columbia would be different? Or do you think that Columbia would be different?
I'm not sure that Columbia would necessarily be different, but I think that collectively, when we see students embarking on these actions across the United States at different institutions, it certainly sends an important signal to university administrators that business as usual is simply not on the cards.
And do you think that there's a potential for this pressure to create change within the university? Do you think that divestment is a realistic outcome?
I think there are incredible successes in simply calling for a tuition strike, in moving to this next level in the protest movement, in building a collection, a solidarity of students who are willing to put themselves on the line. And so it goes beyond the simple action to also translating into, I think, a very powerful symbolic act of solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank.
How will this strike help the situation that is going on in Gaza?
There's an incredible Palestinian poet, Rifat al-Arir, who was killed in an Israeli airstrike just over a week ago. And he has this incredible poem called If I Must Die. He says in the poem, if I must die, you must live to tell my story. And if I must die, he says, let it bring hope, let it be a tale. I think the call for a tuition strike, faculty solidarity, is in some ways giving effect to his memory, for us to bring hope, to tell his story.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
In contrast to Columbia students calling for a tuition strike against Israel, the mayor's office maintains its strong pro-Israel stance. And they showed it by hosting New York's top 100 Israeli-owned tech startups at New York City Mayor Eric Adams' home on the Upper East Side. Jane Sartwell was there.
This morning's event was originally designed to strengthen the relationship between Israel's tech sector and New York City. It was planned before the events of October 7th, but given the current political situation, the underlying message of the summit was the mayor's ongoing support for Israel.
We could have easily have done this in a convention center somewhere, but we wanted the intimate setting of being here in Gracie Mansion so that we can really show our level of commitment.
Adams' support remains strong even following yesterday's landslide UN vote for a ceasefire in Gaza. Among the mayor's guests was Anat Katz, Israel's economic minister to North America.
Basically what we want to see is kind of a twinning with New York, make New York the home away from home for Israeli companies.
But not all New Yorkers support Israeli companies or this summit celebrating them. Here's New Yorker Mossab Sadea.
It's disappointing, but not unexpected at all, that Mayor Eric Adams would prioritize Israeli business interests over the people of New York City, and specifically over Muslim New Yorkers and Arab New Yorkers and pro-Palestine supporters, knowing full well that the Israeli tech industry has its hands dipped very deeply in the genocide happening in Gaza right now.
One attendee, Asher Shapira, left Israel for New York City on Sunday to attend the event. He represents an Israeli-Canadian venture capital company. His company invests in military equipment.
We have many projects that are integrated into drones, like computer vision and analytics that the drones are using to analyze data.
Drones are of special interest to the mayor's office. After Mayor Adams returned from his visit to Israel in August, he gushed about the drone technology used by Israeli police. Later this evening, Adams will attend a display of 500 drones over the Hudson River that will spell out #BringThemHomeNow, calling for the release of Israeli hostages being held in Gaza. This is Jane Sartwell, Columbia Radio News.
Churches in New York City have traditionally provided food and support to migrants, but this year has pushed them to their limit. The city has seen an influx of more than 100,000 asylum seekers. Gabriela Henriquez follows a Catholic church in their response to this new challenge.
The Watson Hotel in Manhattan is one of the shelters set up to house hundreds of asylum seekers. And 3 times a week, volunteers from the St. Peter's Church come to feed them. The program started this year as the church saw that more immigrants needed help with the food. Fabian Arias is the priest of that church.
We received the fresh food and we spend to the people because in the shelter they had a problem they can to cook and prepare the food. So we spend the food ready for the eat.
The program is an extension of a food distribution that the church started during the pandemic. More than 400 people were showing up every week, but the influx of asylum seekers has pushed the church to its limits.
50 or 55% more people now comparatively with 2 years ago.
What newly arrived asylum seekers truly needed were prepared meals. So priest areas and the volunteers organized this new program for them. On this Friday night, volunteers unload 2 vans with prepared meals and organize them on top of a folding table next to the hotel. And soon after, people start to gather. I spoke with Anail Castillo, an asylum seeker from Venezuela who comes every Friday night. She has 2 kids, ages 3 and 11, and a husband. She said she has been living at this shelter for the past 2 months.
Con esta comida es una ayuda para nosotros grandemente. Y de verdad que bueno, estamos agradecidas primeramente con Dios.
She said the food has been helpful and she thanks God and the priest for this support. In Venezuela, Castillo works as a merchant selling various products. But in New York City, she hasn't been able to find a job because she still doesn't have a work permit.
Oye, mira, contar que sea bueno, honrado el que me salgo ahorita porque tengo unos hijos que mantener y de verdad no queremos.
Castillo said she wants whatever work opportunity she can find that it's honorable. She doesn't want to keep relying on the help given by the government, the shelters, or charities. She wants to have a place of her own, but first, she needs a job. Arias has been working for decades with immigrants in the city, but for the past 2 years, this task has become more challenging. If 100,000 people come again to the city next year, is the church willing and at capacity to help all these people again?
Well, that the building for the church had the capacity for 1,000 people. Our heart, yes. Our heart had a capacity for really love, protect the people in the city. It's the reason why we go where the people they are.
But that takes money. He's been raising funds from his parishioners and pushing people in the city to donate food, clothes, and money. He's still not focusing on the challenges for next year. He's just taking one problem at a time. Gabriela Enriquez, Columbia Radio News.
New York City pet owners rely on boarding services for their dogs while they're away during the holidays. However, a mysterious new virus is steering pet owners away from sending their 4-legged friends to communal kennels. Catherine McGrath reports from a kennel in the West Village.
A highly contagious novel respiratory virus with symptoms like coughing, lethargy, sneezing, and pneumonia is spreading quickly across the United States. And no, I'm not talking about COVID. The unnamed virus has affected hundreds of canines in 14 states. The virus has already killed some dogs, but the mystery surrounding the illness makes it difficult to determine the exact number of deaths. While there have been no recorded cases in New York State yet, vets say it is only a matter of time. I spoke with Michael Fink, the operations director of Dogma, where you can send your dogs while you're away. He says news of the virus is already impacting his business.
We don't even know what it is, so who knows what to look out for. However, people do watch the news, and when something happens in Massachusetts, people panic here. We've gotten plenty of phone calls and emails about it already, and we've seen a drop in visitation.
While veterinarians race to figure out the cause and best cure for this virus, Fink says he looks to the New York City Department of Health and local veterinarians for guidance. He recently sent out an email to his clients outlining 8 steps he is taking to prevent the spread, including sanitizing surfaces every night, sending sick dogs home, and requiring vaccinations.
One thing that we've changed because of this is we don't accept dogs from out of state right now. People that travel through, especially around the holidays, we won't take that risk. We don't want to have a potential exposure to our current clients.
New Yorkers love their dogs more than most. They will take their dogs out to dinner, out shopping, and on vacations. But the strange virus is forcing dog parents across the city to leave their furry children at home. Ariel Hendrick and her 3-year-old Cavapoo Bodhi are clients at Dogma. She says she has stopped sending him to school since hearing about it.
We just kept him out of daycare, kept him out of the dog parks, not going to random dogs on the street. He's my love, so I don't want anything bad to happen to him.
She says she is going away for the holidays, but plans to take Bodhi with her instead of sending him to Dogma. A few feet away from where I spoke with Hendrick and Bodhi, the Washington Square Park dog run was filled with dogs. Doodles, Pomskis, Dachshunds, and Terriers. According to a study conducted by the University of New Hampshire, the virus presents similarly to kennel cough, a highly contagious infection that spreads through airborne droplets. Vets recommend staying away from spaces where dogs interact, but in New York City, the dog park and kennel are their only place to exercise and socialize. Shakima Hutcherson, a dog walker in the West Village, relies on a sense of community to prevent the virus from spreading.
Everybody in the park in this area knows each other, so we know where the dogs have gone, what they do on the weekend, who they're interacting with.
The holiday season is stressful for many reasons. Sending your dog to a kennel is supposed to give you peace of mind. This year, pet owners may want to start making plans sooner. But for now, New York City dogs have avoided the illness. Catherine McGrath, Columbia Radio News.
On Wednesday, the MTA approved the New York City Congestion Pricing Plan. Private vehicle commuters will soon have to pay about $15 to enter Manhattan's Central Business District, starting on 60th Street, south of Central Park. Devanya Wilson reports.
Congestion pricing is coming to America, New York City to be exact. The Central Business District tolling program, first proposed in 2007, was officially approved last Wednesday. The program is expected to raise millions to fund the MTA's mass transit program, reduce pollution, traffic congestion, and solve parking issues in the city. Jesse Cervantes said he has noticed the new scanning devices in Midtown.
Some of the regulations they're putting in play, like the taxes and making everything so expensive with the tolls, is pretty much unfair to people who need to commute every day with their vehicles.
The congestion pricing plan is expected to take effect next spring, charging cars entering the tolling zone approximately $15 daily. Trucks will be charged anywhere between $24 and $36, and motorcycles $7.50. Taxis and rideshare vehicles like Ubers and Lyfts are not exempt. They will be charged $1.25 and $2.50 respectively per trip, which should be added to customers' fares.
I think that congestion pricing is not a bad idea. The problem is that the MTA has failed to institute the changes that other cities have made in order to enact it. They have not expanded transit service more broadly, as other cities did before implementing congestion pricing.
That was Renee Baruch, founder of lobbyist group NYC Resident Parking. She founded the lobbyist group in 2022 aimed at urging state officials to implement a resident parking permit system to combat the parking crisis.
Parking in the city is the main reason why I have not bought a car yet.
Parking garages are expensive, huh?
Yeah, they are. They always want you to charge, depending on what area you are in the city, it could be $40 for an hour.
We have attempted to engage public officials. They have failed to respond to us. They have failed to institute a residential parking permit program, which every other city has. And the only reason that they have failed to do that is because of the bicycle lobby, which is so powerful and has prevented the institution of many, many changes that need to be made. Residential parking permits, one among them.
So do you think the city should enact residential parking permits before moving to congestion pricing?
Absolutely. It's already pretty crazy out there. One of the issues that I see now is that out-of-state plates constitute about 20% of the vehicles that park for free in our streets. And I think that people who come into New York from other areas are at least going to try to avoid the central business district.
New Yorkers are already unhappy about parking in the city. And when paired with the congestion pricing plan, it might become an even bigger problem. Devanya Wilson, Columbia Radio News.
So, Abby, you're from the suburbs. You commute in every day. What do you think people are going to do?
Yeah, I think the MTA is going to get really crowded, which it already is during rush hour. But I guess the new congestion issue is just going to be on the train.
I guess that'll be a taste of New York subway life for you, which will probably get worse when this congestion pricing plan goes into effect.
You're listening to Uptown Radio.
There's more to come. Stay with us.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Abby Rose Notar Nicola.
And I'm Shankar Nesathuray. Coming up, we go to the Bronx, where neighbors are recovering from not one, but two big emergencies.
And we hear from New York's community composters. They are raising a stink about what they're calling a rotten budget cut.
What happens when you combine nerdy computer coders with ultra-cool electronic musicians? A new performance art called Live Coding shows us just that.
These stories and more coming up. But first, the headlines.
From Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Jane Godner with state and local news. This afternoon, New York State Assemblymember Nili Rozic visited Flushing to speak with Israeli survivors of the October 7th Hamas attack. She was joined by New York Israeli Deputy Consul General Tzach Star. Rozic used the opportunity to reiterate her call to bring home the remaining hostages in Gaza. Mayor Eric Adams signed the Fair Housing Framework legislation that would encourage more low-income housing in New York City neighborhoods.
Outdated regulations have contributed to housing discrimination and inequality. We've often ignored it and wondered why we could not really integrate our city is because our housing stock was not integrated in the right way. And for far too long, we have let restrictive laws and zoning rules keep us from building the housing we need.
Also this afternoon, New York City Public Advocate Jamani Williams unveiled his 2023 Worst Landlord Watch List. Williams then invited rally attendees to tour a building that he believes is owned by one of the worst landlords in New York on West 46th Street and 9th Avenue. This morning, a 19-year-old man was indicted for the murder of his Queens landlady after a dispute about the rent. The landlady was speaking with the man, David Vidal, in his apartment about his unpaid rent when he assaulted her. She later died of strangulation. Vidal faces second-degree murder charges. Today, Housing Works is celebrating the opening of the new healthcare center. The Westside Community Health Center will provide primary care services on a sliding scale out of its Hell's Kitchen location. The center is an extension of Housing Works' mission to combat healthcare inequity and homelessness in New York City. Tonight, Madonna brings her World Celebration Tour to New York City and to North America. After a 6-month postponement, fans are excited to finally see her perform at the Barclays Center. Madonna fans were lined up to get into a Madonna-themed pop-up shop outside of the venue. That's where reporter Brad Burns spoke with Nuki.
Could you tell me if this is your first time seeing Madonna, or how many times have you seen her?
It's my first time that
First
I
time?
see her, yeah.
How excited are you to see Madonna?
Very exciting. Because I was planning to see her about 10 years ago, but I don't have that opportunity.
And what's your favorite song by Madonna?
Papa Don't Preach.
The Madonna shop is selling a rhinestone-embedded hoodie for $195, the perfect opportunity for New Yorkers to unleash their inner material girl. This is Jane Godner, Columbia Radio News.
This morning, 230
231st Street was filled with fire trucks and police. Smoke was pouring out of the roof of a corner deli. The firefighters were up on ladders spraying water on the fire. Neighbors were standing around to watch the excitement. The fire started at 3:30 in the morning. Erin, who lives across the street, heard the commotion.
This building here? This building in front
Yeah, fifth floor. I had a front row view of this whole thing. Smoke, bits of smoke started to come out. People started yelling and screaming, and around 3:30, the first trucks started to come in.
Do you know the owner of the
This deli? No, but I have my breakfast there every morning, and I'm sorry to see them go because
it's a big community. It's a big community.
Almost immediately, fire trucks arrived from all over the city. Tom Carrero is the deputy chief for the New York City Fire Department.
About 3:30 this morning, we received a phone alarm for fire at 228 West 231. Units upon arrival had a heavy fire condition. It'll be a prolonged operation due to the body of fire and being able to knock down some stubborn areas of fire extension.
Neighbors say there was a party with live musicians in the deli last night, but nobody knows if this was the cause. Only one person suffered smoke inhalation and was treated on the scene. By 9 a.m., the fire was under control. A neighboring building had been evacuated, but Erin, the neighbor, said that some of the residents were allowed to go back inside.
everybody from that building there was evacuated. Okay. He's telling me, because he has a relative, that they're allowing for them to come in to get their possessions, but they don't know when they can go back into their apartments because of the smoke. The smoke was really heavy.
The fire department says the cause of the fire is under investigation. Tommaso Baronio, Columbia Radio News.
In light of the $7.1 billion out-year budget gap that Mayor Eric Adams heavily attributed to the migrant crisis, every city agency will have to cut 5% of their budget. The Department of Sanitation is set to stop funding 8 major community composting operations and over 100 jobs effective January 1st. Tara Herschel reports.
Hi, good morning. You can drop off right here.
On a cloudy Sunday morning, Nurture BK Compost hosted their weekly food scrap drop-off in Brooklyn. Scraps dropped off by the community are processed here and turned into compost by nonprofit Big Reuse. This procedure is an example of community composting. Nurture BK set up a tent by the park and laid out containers to collect the scraps. Sunny Putt usually drops off their scraps there every Sunday.
I don't know what I'll do after the budget cuts, because I don't really trust the brown bins.
Why not, if I may ask?
What I'm reading, it doesn't seem like they're functioning the way that they're intended to.
According to the Lower East Side Ecology Center, community composting accounts for the collection of over 8 million pounds of food scraps at 155 sites. But the city points to the fact that community composting only makes up 1/10 of the city's compost budget. The city has separately rolled out brown bins in certain boroughs as part of its new mandatory composting program. But according to an article by the news organization The City, most of these scraps aren't composted, but are instead converted into a slurry and mixed with what they call wastewater sludge. This is then digested at a sewage plant in Brooklyn, generating methane that powers the plant. The Department of Sanitation did not respond to our inquiry about this. Ethan Johns is a Nurture BK volunteer and explained what the budget cuts meant for them.
Without Big Reuse picking up the food scraps from us, we wouldn't be able to be here volunteering, and without funding from the government, Big Reuse would not be able to actually process the compost.
A portion of the New York community's food scraps are processed at Earth Matters compost facility on Governor's Island. Several Grow NYC employees working there on Monday were loading compost into green bins. The apprehension over the possible job cuts was palpable.
Yeah, they've already sent us little articles on how to conduct an interview, how to write your resume, and places to look for jobs.
That was Violet Black, a Grow NYC driver. Natalie Huang is a compost coordinator at Grow NYC and spoke candidly about her situation.
We're real people who
have the passion and the heart and the drive for this job. It's unimaginable to think that it'll just be completely gone.
There's a petition to stop the mayor and the city council from passing the budget cuts, which over 40,000 people have signed. Over a week ago, a community rally was organized at City Hall Park with a big turnout. People from the impacted community composting organizations and passionate advocates were in attendance. Ezra Ellingwood was handing out educational flyers that day.
So I am fully employed on that community composting budget. So if we don't save our funding, I will be personally unemployed at the end of the year.
They now live with uncertainty about what will happen next.
But I also just had to cancel my Christmas travel so I can stay here because we don't know how it's going to be like right at the end of the year.
For now, the fate of community composting hangs in the balance, with the new year less than 3 weeks away. Tara Hirschel, Columbia Radio News.
School suspensions are up in New York City, almost a third higher than last year. This can derail a student's education, but there's a program that's trying to reduce suspensions by pairing suspended students with law school students. Rachel Kahn reports.
Vito Gasparo was a junior at the High School of Art and Design when he was caught vandalizing school property. Of course, he didn't see it that way.
You would think like a school like that would be like accepting of like all types of art forms. And like one of my main art forms is graffiti.
Gasparo's fate was determined in a meeting with his parents, principal, and superintendent. No one was there to advocate for him, and he transferred schools.
You kind of lose all the structure from one school, then you move to another one, you lose that structure. So it's just like, how do you expect me to continuously have the drive to like come and be present when things are very temporary all the time?
Gasparo ended up dropping out. He's 20 years old, and he has no high school diploma. Cases like Gasparo's are what inspired law students to found the Suspension Representation Project, or SRP. One of the law students currently involved in the project is Caroline Strauss.
The overall view of SRP is that suspension is really never the answer because it provides no benefit to the student and typically only makes things worse.
Here's how it works. When a student is suspended for more than 5 days, they get a chance to attend a suspension hearing, essentially to plead their case. Law students like Strauss show up and act as the student's lawyers. They provide evidence, they cross-examine, they call witnesses.
It's basically like a mini trial.
Last school year, SRP advocates helped get students a better suspension outcome in over 50% of cases.
We are really, really successful as an organization. I know from both my cases, one of the suspensions was completely they took it away completely. She was able to go to school the next day.
When students don't have representation, they often make mistakes, like accepting the suspension without a hearing. Strauss thinks this is because students don't know their rights. So if I was a student who had just been suspended, what would you tell me?
I would say, remember everything that happened. Call the school to get copies of everything that they have regarding whatever happens, and also don't do anything self-incriminating, I would say.
Rohini Singh is the director of the School Justice Project at Advocates for Children. She's an actual lawyer. She believes that organizations like SRP help students on an individual level, but big picture, she's less optimistic.
Even when you win a case, it doesn't feel like a victory, right?
To Singh, the whole ideology of student discipline must change.
If there's a way to prevent school staff and teachers and school officials from, viewing behavior in a way that where like any sort of misbehavior just needs punishment or consequences, I think that could go a long way.
Singh says that changes in the system need to be made before a suspension is actually issued. But as long as kids keep getting suspensions, law students and SRP will continue to come to their defense. This is Rachel Kahn with Columbia Radio News.
COVID-19 cases are spiking in New York City. There are now 3 times as many people hospitalized with COVID than during the summer. We all know how COVID-19 can affect your lungs and breathing. One thing that's less well known is how COVID-19 infections can play havoc with the brains of elderly people. I spoke with Dr. Brian Masajic today, a professor of medicine at McMaster University. He specializes in geriatric medicine. I asked him how COVID-19 specifically affects the minds of the elderly.
COVID-19 has been a disaster for older persons, including those who have never actually had COVID. The pandemic restrictions alone had a lot of older persons crumble with inability to see their family doctors, inability to see friends, neighbors. Everything was shut down in the earlier days of the pandemic response. But for those adults who have had COVID, before the vaccines were available for them, a lot of them crumbled and died from especially those located in long-term care facilities where about 80% of the deaths took place.
Dr. Masajic, can you share how infection with COVID affects memory and thinking?
The virus itself, there is some evidence of direct invasion of your central nervous system, leading to a kind of encephalitis or inflammation of the brain. And this ongoing brain inflammation can cause a kind of a neural fog, a brain fog. You can also have COVID lead to a delirium, which is an acute confusional state, often because of something's wrong with the person. They're very sick. They're not getting enough oxygen to their brain. And individuals that have not enough oxygen in their brain and requiring ICU supports or oxygenation supports, these individuals would have a persistent delirium, and delirium is toxic. The longer a person is delirious, it hurts their brain.
It strikes me that you mentioned that there might be more people getting demented or having dementia as a result of COVID. What are the implications to the health system when there are more people who have cognitive impairment and or dementia?
It's awkward and complicated is what it is. We already have our usual suspects of Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementias, Lewy body dementias, but having acquired brain injury dementia caused by COVID, by whatever mechanism we want to label it as, is just going to add insult to already a large problem that affects older persons disproportionately.
Can you comment on what is the consequence of repeated COVID infections on the brain?
Having recurrent infections is not a good thing. You're just rolling the dice, and it could come up snake eyes. And so the trick is not to roll the dice, not to take chances, not to do things that would increase our risks of COVID.
Brian, thanks. I really appreciate you taking time on your busy day to come answer some of our questions.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
This time last year, young Chinese people in New York and around the world rallied against the Chinese government. They protested by holding up white sheets of paper. Now, local Chinese students are still using paper to empower themselves, but through more creative means, by making zines. Vikram Najawan reports.
And fold it into 8 squares.
In a windowless room in a nondescript Manhattan building, 10 young people sit around a table. It's covered with multicolored papers, markers, and rubber stamps. But this is no ordinary art class. It's a zine-making workshop hosted by a group called the Zephyr Society.
It helped first-generation Chinese diasporas to find a small political home.
That's Jun, the student activist who's leading this workshop. He joined Zephyr Society earlier this year. The group formed in the wake of China's largest anti-government uprising in a generation, known as the White Paper Movement. And ever since then, Zephyr Society has aimed to provide a community for young Chinese dissidents through events like this workshop.
I haven't done any art or craft project like that before.
That's Young Ying, a Taiwanese student who attended the workshop. Her zine, along with all the others, is sprawled across the table. The decorations on these booklets, including imagery of Tiananmen Square, say a lot. These are messages the students would be too afraid to share publicly. As Jenna Friedman, Barnard College's zine librarian, says,
I feel like zines have both more intimacy and vulnerability, but in some ways they're a little bit safer.
Zines are small, homemade paper booklets. They've gone hand in hand with counterculture movements in North America for decades, and even in an age of online interaction, they continue to resonate as a form of creative expression.
I think we're at a point in time where we want to go back to physical collaboration with others, maybe weekly meetups with certain people, strangers, friends.
That's Natalie Aguilar, a manager at the Brooklyn Museum. She's showing me their new exhibit all about the history of zines from the 60s to the present. Punk music croons from the speakers in the gallery hall. Provocative images stare down at us from the walls. For generations, zines have spoken to a defiance familiar to all young adults. And now, Jun and his Zephyr Society peers can relate. The zines they make in their workshops serve a special role to process their own past experiences with trauma.
My experience, my story, is just a small sample of the big picture.
A year ago, at the height of the white paper movement, Jun was living back home in Shanghai. One day, police officers arrested him for simply walking down the street. It deeply unsettled him, but making a zine helped him process that experience.
Making this kind of zine, I think it is a way for me to keep this memory.
Now, he hopes to share this same creative outlet with his dissident peers to foster solidarity. Despite facing suppression and online censorship, their spirits remain stronger than ever. On November 25th at City Hall Park, other local activists gathered to mark the 1-year anniversary of the white paper movement. In this way, they want to keep the memory of their struggle alive. And for Jun, making zines serves the same purpose. He seals that message by marking his own zine with a Statue of Liberty stamp. Vikram Najawan, Columbia Radio News.
What you're hearing is a recent live show in East Williamsburg. But get this, there are no musicians on stage. Instead, computer programmers are typing commands feverishly into their laptops. With the addition of a few parentheses or a couple letters, the beat changes. It's called live coding, and it's gaining popularity, Lauren Dalbin reports.
Jade Rose is a software engineer in Boston. Tonight, she has come all the way to New York to perform under the name Switch Angel. Her computer code, which includes instructions like echo and loop, as well as an endless stream of numbers, is projected on a screen. That code becomes the music.
The whole concept of the code being on the screen and being able to read it sort of creates this default expectation of collaboration and openness.
Live coders like Rose encourage the audience to come stand beside them to closely observe their creative process. Rose has only been live coding for a year. She likes that she is able to create her own tools to make music, rather than relying on classic music software.
Modern software for making music, it kind of puts you in this strict, regimented process. It sort of like bludgeons you into their workflow.
Rose is one of the many who have become interested in live coding in the past 3 years. But the New York scene itself has existed since 2016, and many here tonight were present around the time of its inception. Jessica Arson is one of these people.
They immediately were like, "Do you want to play a show?" And I was like, "Yeah, but I make like loud noise music. Is that okay?" And they were like, "Yes, that's great."
Arson creates noise music with code. Her performances often include sudden high-pitched sounds and rapid blended percussion. On stage, she dances and nods her head to the music. She says the pandemic inspired many people to get into creative coding because it can facilitate connections between people online.
It's definitely exciting because there's a lot of new people, but it's also like there's a lot of things that we have to consider when it comes with that kind of growth.
The increasing number of events places a heavy burden on live coders involved in the organizing. Many events can take up to 5 hours to prepare for. More experimental live coders like Arson are also worried about performing in front of larger crowds.
There was a point where I was like, do I still fit in here? Like, is this for me? Like, I make weird, like I scream and I don't make techno, and like, is that okay?
After her solo performance, Arson is joined by 3 other live coders. This is the collective's first jam performance, where coders all edit and add to the same lines of code. It was a lot. Genesis Cabrera, a regular at these events, witnessed the performance.
I felt like I was going through a wave, a very changeable, shifting wave. I did honestly at times find it a little overstimulating.
Cabrera has been involved in the collective for only a couple months. A love of abstract art, she uses creative coding to make graphics. artists like her often partner with music coders to create a dual visual and auditory experience. Live Code NYC may soon need to create a formal organizational structure to deal with this new influx of members, but this evening, it still feels new and intimate. Lauren Dalbin, Columbia Radio News.
Well, that's it for this edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Today, our executive producer was Rachel Kahn, senior editor was Tara Herschel, Vikram Nawajan and Jane Goniger delivered the news.
Our senior producer was Lauren Dalbin, and Catherine McGrath and Gabriela Henriquez produced our interviews.
In the studio was director Davina Wilson and board operators Catherine McGrath and Gabriela Hernandez.
Our instructors, Robert Smith and Lydia McMullen-Laird, advised our staff. I'm Abby Rose Notar Nicola.
And I'm Shankar Nesathure. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening.